Ethan Reynolds glanced at his opulent mansion through the pouring rain, unaware that the decision he was about to make would unravel his entire world. The windshield wipers of his luxury sports car fought a losing battle against the deluge, mirroring the struggle within his own mind. He squinted through the downpour, his headlights catching a huddled form at the bus stop near his estate's entrance. A woman and a child, drenched and shivering. His first instinct was to drive on, to retreat into the cocoon of his wealth and isolation. But something, a flicker of humanity he thought long extinguished, made him slow the car. Ethan's hand hovered over the window control. "What are you doing?" he muttered to himself. But before he could talk himself out of it, he lowered the window. "Do you need help?" he called out, his voice barely audible over the rain. The woman's head snapped up, fear and suspicion etched across her face. She pulled the child closer, as if to shield her from some unseen threat. "We're fine," she replied, her voice hoarse and wary. Ethan frowned. They were clearly not fine. The child, a girl he now saw, was trembling, her clothes plastered to her small frame. "Look, I live just up the road. I have a dry place you can stay for the night." The words tumbled out before he could stop them. The woman's eyes narrowed. "Why would you help us?" It was a fair question, one Ethan himself couldn't fully answer. Because it's raining and you're out here and I have space. Does there need to be another reason?" For a long moment, the only sound was the patter of rain on metal and asphalt. Then, slowly, the woman nodded. "Okay, but just for tonight." As they climbed into his car, Ethan caught a whiff of dampness and desperation. He tried not to wrinkle his nose. "I'm Ethan," he said, attempting a smile. "Caroline," the woman replied, her voice still guarded. "And this is my daughter, Lily." The girl looked up at him with wide, curious eyes. "Your car smells nice," she said softly. Ethan felt an unexpected warmth in his chest. "Thank you, Lily. I'm glad you like it." The drive to the mansion was short, but laden with an awkward silence. As they pulled up to the grand entrance, Caroline gasped. "You live here?" she asked, incredulity coloring her voice. Ethan nodded, suddenly self-conscious of his wealth. It's just a house," he mumbled, knowing full well it was anything but. As they entered, the cavernous foyer echoed with their footsteps. Charles, Ethan's butler, appeared as if summoned by some silent alarm. "Sir, I wasn't expecting," Charles began, his eyes widening at the sight of their bedraggled guests. "Charles, these are our guests for the night, Caroline and Lily. Could you show them to the guest rooms in the East Wing?" Charles's face remained impassive, but Ethan caught the slight tightening around his eyes. "Of course, sir. This way, please." As Charles led them away, Ethan heard Lily's excited whisper. "Mom, it's like a castle." Left alone, Ethan ran a hand through his hair, wondering what he'd just done. He'd never invited strangers into his home before. Hell, he barely invited friends. But something about the desperation in Caroline's eyes, the innocence in Lily's, it stirred something in him he thought long dead. The next morning, Ethan found himself hovering outside the guest wing, unsure of how to proceed. The sound of laughter, child's laughter, drew him towards one of the rooms. He knocked softly and pushed the door open. Lily was bouncing on the bed, her face alight with joy. Caroline sat in a chair nearby, a small smile playing on her lips despite the worry lines etched around her eyes. "Good morning," Ethan said, feeling oddly like an intruder in his own home. Lily stopped bouncing and grinned at him. "This bed is so big and soft. It's like sleeping on a cloud." Ethan couldn't help but smile back. "I'm glad you like it. Did you sleep well?" Caroline stood, smoothing down her wrinkled clothes. "We did. Thank you. We'll be out of your hair soon." Ethan frowned. There's no rush. In fact, he paused, surprised by the words forming in his mind. "You're welcome to stay in the basement apartment for a while, until you figure out your next steps." Caroline's eyes widened in shock. "We couldn't possibly." "Please," Ethan interrupted. "I have the space, and it's no trouble." Caroline studied him for a long moment, as if trying to decipher some hidden motive. Finally, she nodded. "Thank you. That's incredibly generous." As the days passed, Ethan found himself increasingly unsettled by the presence of his new house guests. It wasn't that they were disruptive. Quite the opposite. Caroline kept to herself, only emerging from the basement apartment for necessities. But Lily was a whirlwind of curiosity and innocence that seemed to penetrate the carefully constructed walls of Ethan's solitude. One evening, as Ethan worked late in his home office, a small voice startled him from his concentration. "What are you doing?" He looked up to see Lily standing in the doorway, her head tilted in curiosity. "I'm working," Ethan replied, realizing how inadequate the answer sounded. Lily padded into the room, her eyes roving over the sleek computers and gadgets. "On what?" Ethan hesitated. How do you explain complex algorithms and data analysis to a child? "I'm trying to make computers smarter," he said finally. Lily's eyes lit up. "Like robots?" A chuckle escaped Ethan's lips. "Something like that." "Can I help?" The question caught Ethan off guard. He was about to refuse when he saw the eager hope in Lily's eyes. "Sure," he found himself saying. "Why don't you draw what you think a smart computer would look like?" As Lily settled down with paper and crayons, Ethan felt a strange warmth spreading through his chest. It was nice having someone else in the room, even if they were just coloring. The peace was shattered by the shrill beep of Ethan's security system. He frowned, pulling up the alert on his tablet. The system was registering unusual activity at one of the side entrances. "Stay here," he told Lily, his voice tense. He moved swiftly through the house, his heart racing. As he approached the door in question, he saw nothing amiss. But the hair on the back of his neck stood up. A noise from behind made him whirl around. Caroline stood there, her face pale. "Is everything okay?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. Ethan studied her, noting the fear in her eyes. "Just a false alarm, I think. The security system's been acting up lately." Caroline nodded, but Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that she knew more than she was letting on. That night, as Ethan lay in bed, his mind raced with possibilities. Who were Caroline and Lily, really? Why had they been at that bus stop in the rain? And why did Caroline look so frightened at the mere suggestion of a security breach? His musings were interrupted by a crash from downstairs. Ethan bolted upright, his heart pounding. He grabbed his phone and crept out of his room, every nerve on high alert. As he descended the stairs, he heard muffled voices and the sound of breaking glass. Thieves, he realized with a jolt. His mansion was being robbed. Ethan's finger hovered over the emergency call button on his phone. But before he could press it, a familiar voice stopped him cold. "I told you I don't have it." It was Caroline, her voice a harsh whisper. "You're lying," a man's voice growled. "Where is it?" Ethan's mind reeled. Caroline was involved in this. Had this been her plan all along? He peered around the corner, his blood running cold at the scene before him. Caroline was backed against a wall, a large man looming over her. Shattered pieces of what had once been a priceless vase littered the floor. "Please," Caroline begged. "I left it all behind. I swear." The man raised his hand, and Ethan acted on instinct. He stepped into view, his voice steadier than he felt. "Get away from her." The intruder spun around, surprise flashing across his face before it settled into a menacing grin. Well, looks like we've got company." In that moment, as Ethan faced down the stranger in his own home, he realized that his decision to help Caroline and Lily had set in motion a chain of events that would change everything. The comfortable isolation of his wealthy existence was shattered, replaced by a dangerous reality he never could have imagined. As the intruder advanced, Ethan's mind raced. Who was this man? What did he want? And most importantly, what secrets was Caroline hiding? The answers, he knew, would shake the very foundations of the life he'd built. But there was no going back now. For better or worse, Ethan Reynolds had stepped out of his isolated world and into a storm of secrets, lies, and unexpected connections. And somewhere in the house, a little girl named Lily slept, unaware that her presence had already begun to transform the life of a lonely millionaire in ways none of them could have predicted. Ethan's fist slammed against the basement door, the impact reverberating through the mansion's cavernous halls. "Caroline, open up now." The door creaked open, revealing Caroline's pale, drawn face. "Ethan, what's wrong?" He thrust his tablet in her face, security footage playing on the screen. "Explain this." Caroline's eyes widened as she watched herself sneaking through the mansion during the robbery. I can explain." "Save it," Ethan snarled. "I trusted you. I brought you into my home, and this is how you repay me." Lily appeared behind her mother, eyes brimming with tears. "What's happening?" Caroline turned, shielding her daughter. "Lily, go back inside. It's okay." "It's not okay," Ethan snapped. "Nothing about this is okay. I'm calling the police." "No." Caroline lunged forward, grabbing Ethan's arm. "Please, you don't understand. I had no choice." Ethan wrenched his arm free. "No choice. You had every choice. I gave you a place to stay, food, safety, and you threw it all away for what? A few valuables." Caroline's face crumpled. "It wasn't like that. I swear, I didn't take anything. I was trying to protect us." "Protect you from what?" Ethan's voice dripped with sarcasm. "My generosity." "From him," Caroline whispered, her voice barely audible. Ethan paused, confusion momentarily replacing anger. "Him? Who's him?" Before Caroline could answer, Lily's small voice cut through the tension. "Daddy. She means daddy." The word hung in the air, heavy with implication. Ethan's gaze darted between mother and daughter, his mind racing to connect the dots. Caroline sighed, her shoulders sagging. "My ex-husband, Lily's father. He's not a good man." Ethan's anger deflated, replaced by a gnawing uncertainty. He ran a hand through his hair, suddenly aware of how little he knew about these women he'd invited into his home. "Start from the beginning," he said, his voice quieter now. "And don't leave anything out." Hours later, Ethan sat in his study, nursing a glass of whiskey. Caroline's story echoed in his mind, a tale of abuse, escape, and constant fear. He wanted to believe her, but doubt gnawed at him. A soft knock interrupted his brooding. Charles entered, his face a mask of polite concern. "Sir, is everything all right? I couldn't help but overhear the commotion earlier." Ethan sighed. "I don't know, Charles. I thought I was doing the right thing, but now, I just don't know." Charles's lips thinned. "If I may, sir, I've had my reservations about our guests from the beginning. Perhaps it's time to consider alternative arrangements." Ethan frowned. "You mean throw them out?" "I merely suggest prioritizing your own safety and peace of mind, sir." As Charles left, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that he was missing something crucial. He drained his glass, decision made. In the morning, he'd ask Caroline and Lily to leave. But morning brought new complications. Ethan woke to find his study in disarray, papers strewn across the floor. As he bent to pick them up, a chill ran down his spine. These weren't just any papers. They were confidential documents related to his latest tech project. A noise from the hallway made him whirl around. A shadow darted past the doorway. Ethan gave chase, his heart pounding. He rounded a corner and collided with a solid form. Oof! Ethan stumbled back, finding himself face to face with a man he'd never seen before. The stranger's eyes widened in surprise, then narrowed dangerously. "You shouldn't be here," the man growled. Before Ethan could respond, the intruder's fist connected with his jaw. Pain exploded through Ethan's face as he stumbled backward. He lashed out blindly, feeling his knuckles connect with something solid. The fight was brief but brutal. Ethan, unused to physical confrontation, found himself quickly outmatched. A final blow sent him crashing into a side table. By the time he regained his feet, the intruder had vanished. Ethan leaned against the wall, panting. Blood trickled from a cut above his eye. What the hell was going on? "Ethan." Caroline's voice, laced with concern, came from down the hall. "Are you okay? I heard noises. He turned to face her, anger and confusion warring within him. Who is that man? And don't tell me you don't know. Caroline's face paled. You saw him. Oh God, he's here. We have to leave. Now. Not so fast. Ethan grabbed her arm as she tried to rush past. I want answers. No more lies. No more half-truths. Who is he? Caroline's eyes darted around, fear evident in every line of her body. His name is Greg. He's my ex-husband, Lily's father. The pieces started falling into place. The man you were running from, the one you said was dangerous. Caroline nodded, tears welling in her eyes. I thought we'd lost him. I never imagined he'd find us here. Ethan's mind raced. But how? And why break in? Why steal my documents? Because it's not just about us anymore, Caroline whispered. It's about you two. Before Ethan could demand more answers, a shrill scream pierced the air. Lily's scream. They found her in the kitchen, cowering behind Charles. The butler stood rigid, a kitchen knife held defensively in front of him. He was here, Charles said, his usually unflappable demeanor shaken. A man I didn't recognize. He ran when he saw me, but he trailed off, glancing at Lily. Ethan knelt beside the trembling girl. Lily, did you see him? Did he hurt you? Lily shook her head, her voice barely a whisper. He said to tell Mommy that he's coming for us, that we can't hide anymore. The room fell silent, the weight of the threat hanging heavy in the air. Ethan stood, decision made. We need to call the police. No. Caroline's voice was sharp with panic. You don't understand. Greg has connections. If we involve the police, it'll only make things worse. Ethan's frustration boiled over. Worse than a dangerous man breaking into my home. Worse than my life's work being stolen. How could it possibly be worse? Caroline's next words stopped him cold. Because Greg isn't working alone. He has help. From inside your company. The revelation hit Ethan like a physical blow. He stumbled back, mind reeling. What? How do you know this? I overheard him on the phone last night, Caroline admitted. That's why I was sneaking around. I was trying to find proof, to warn you. Ethan's world tilted on its axis. Everything he thought he knew, every certainty he'd built his life on, suddenly felt like shifting sand beneath his feet. Sir, Charles's voice cut through the chaos in Ethan's mind. Perhaps it's time we considered outside help. I know a private investigator, very discreet. She might be able to shed some light on this situation. Ethan nodded numbly. Do it. And Charles, don't tell anyone else about this. Not until we know who we can trust. As Charles left to make the call, Ethan turned back to Caroline and Lily. The fear in their eyes mirrored his own inner turmoil. He realized, with a jolt of clarity, that their fates were now inextricably linked. We'll figure this out, he said, surprising himself with the conviction in his voice. Together. Caroline's eyes met his, a glimmer of hope breaking through her fear. You believe me. Ethan sighed. I don't know what to believe anymore, but I do know that we're in this mess together now, and I intend to get to the bottom of it. As they stood there, an unlikely trio united by circumstance and danger, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. Whatever storm was coming, they'd have to weather it together. Little did he know, the true test of their newfound alliance was just around the corner, and would shake the very foundations of everything Ethan thought he knew about himself, his work, and the people he'd let into his life. Ethan paced the length of his study, the weight of his newfound knowledge pressing down on him like a physical force. Greg wasn't just after Caroline and Lily. He wanted something from Ethan, too. But what? A soft knock interrupted his brooding. Caroline stood in the doorway, her face a mask of worry and guilt. Ethan, I found something you need to see. She held out a crumpled piece of paper, her hand trembling slightly. Ethan took it, his eyes widening as he read the hastily scrawled note. Where did you get this? His voice was barely above a whisper. Caroline hugged herself, as if warding off a chill. It was in my coat pocket. I don't know how it got there, but I think Greg planted it. Ethan's mind raced. The note contained fragments of information about his latest tech project, information that could be devastating in the wrong hands. This is why he's here. He's after my work. I'm so sorry. Caroline's voice cracked. This is all my fault. If I hadn't come here. Stop. Ethan held up a hand. We can't change the past. We need to focus on what to do now. A commotion from downstairs cut their conversation short. They rushed to the foyer, finding Charles struggling with a man at the front door. Sir, I caught this intruder trying to. Charles grunted as the man's elbow connected with his ribs. Ethan's blood ran cold as he recognized intruder from their earlier altercation. Greg. Greg's eyes darted between Ethan and Caroline, a wolfish grin spreading across his face. Well, isn't this cozy? The millionaire and my runaway wife, playing house. Get out, Ethan snarled, stepping in front of Caroline. Greg laughed, a harsh, grating sound. Or what? You'll call the cops? Go ahead. I'm sure they'd be very interested in the little operation you've got going here. Confusion flashed across Ethan's face. What are you talking about? Oh, come on, Greg sneered. The secret projects, the offshore accounts. You think you're the only one with friends in high places. Ethan's mind reeled. How could Greg know about his confidential work? Unless. His gaze snapped to Caroline, doubt creeping in once again. Don't listen to him, Caroline pleaded, reading the suspicion in Ethan's eyes. He's lying. Greg's grin widened. Am I? Why don't you tell him the truth, Caroline, about why you really came here? The tension in the room was palpable. Ethan looked between Greg and Caroline, uncertainty gnawing at him. Who could he trust? A small voice broke the standoff. Mommy. All heads turned to see Lily at the top of the stairs, her eyes wide with fear. Greg's demeanor changed instantly. There's my little girl. Come give Daddy a hug. No. Caroline's scream tore through the air as she lunged forward, putting herself between Greg and the stairs. The next few moments were chaos. Greg shoved Caroline aside, making a break for the stairs. Ethan tackled him, both men crashing to the ground. They grappled, trading blows, as Charles tried to pull them apart. Run, Lily. Caroline shouted, scrambling to her feet. Hide. Lily hesitated for a moment before darting out of sight. Greg roared in frustration, redoubling his efforts to break free from Ethan's grip. In the midst of a struggle, a sharp crack echoed through the foyer. Everyone froze, turning to see Detective Mary Sanchez standing in the doorway, her gun raised. Nobody move, she commanded, her voice steady and authoritative. Greg went limp beneath Ethan, a sly smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Perfect timing, Detective. I'd like to report a crime. Detective Sanchez's eyes narrowed. And you are? Greg Harris. I'm here to collect my wife and daughter, who've been held against their will by this man. He jerked his head towards Ethan. Ethan scrambled to his feet, his mind racing. That's not true. Save it. Sanchez cut him off. I've got a lot of questions, and you're all going to answer them, starting with why I got an anonymous tip about stolen tech and a hostage situation at this address. The next few hours were a blur of questions, accusations, and mounting tension. Ethan found himself in the surreal position of defending his actions while trying to unravel the web of lies and half-truths that had ensnared him. As night fell, Detective Sanchez pulled Ethan aside. Your story checks out for now, but I'm not convinced you're telling me everything. Ethan ran a hand through his disheveled hair. Believe me, Detective, I wish I knew everything that was going on here. Sanchez's expression softened slightly. Look, I get that you were trying to help, but harboring potential fugitives, getting involved in what looks like corporate espionage, you're in deep, Mr. Reynolds. And I'm not sure I can pull you out. A commotion from the living room drew their attention. They rushed in to find Greg on his feet, a triumphant gleam in his eye. I just got off the phone with my lawyer, he announced. He'll be here within the hour, and when he arrives, I'll have some very interesting information to share about Mr. Reynolds' business practices." Ethan's stomach dropped. "You're bluffing. You don't know anything." Greg's smile was cold. "Don't I? It's amazing what you can learn when you have the right incentives." Caroline, who had been silent for most of the interrogation, suddenly spoke up. "He's working with someone inside your company, Ethan. That's how he knows about your projects." The pieces started falling into place in Ethan's mind. The security breaches, the stolen documents, the insider knowledge. "Who?" he demanded, advancing on Greg. "Who are you working with?" Before Greg could answer, a new voice joined the fray. "I believe I can shed some light on that." All heads turned to see Charles standing in the doorway, his usually impassive face etched with regret. "Charles." Ethan's voice was barely a whisper. "What are you talking about?" The butler straightened his spine, meeting Ethan's gaze. "I'm sorry, sir, but there's something I need to confess." The room fell silent as Charles began to speak, unraveling a tale of long-held grudges, misplaced loyalty, and a conspiracy that went deeper than anyone had imagined. As the truth came to light, Ethan felt the ground shift beneath his feet once again. Everything he thought he knew about his work, his home, the people he'd surrounded himself with, was called into question. But as he looked at Caroline and thought of Lily, hiding somewhere in the vast mansion, he realized that some things remained clear. He had made a choice that night in the rain, a choice to open his door and his life to strangers. And despite everything that had happened since, he couldn't bring himself to regret it. The night stretched on, filled with revelations and confrontations. And as dawn broke over the horizon, Ethan knew that nothing would ever be the same again. The comfortable isolation of his former life was gone, replaced by a complex web of relationships and responsibilities. But for the first time in years, he felt truly alive. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he would face them, not alone, but with the unlikely family he had found in the midst of chaos. As Detective Sanchez prepared to take Greg into custody, Ethan caught Caroline's eye across the room. A silent understanding passed between them. They had weathered the storm together, and in doing so, had forged a bond stronger than either of them could have imagined. The future was uncertain, fraught with legal battles and potential scandal. But as Lily emerged from her hiding place, running to embrace her mother, Ethan felt a surge of determination. They would face whatever came next as a unit, a strange, broken, beautiful family born from desperation and chance. And somehow, against all odds, they would find a way to make it work. Ethan stood in the ruins of his once pristine study, shattered glass crunching beneath his feet. The weight of betrayal pressed down on him, suffocating and relentless. How had it come to this? Caroline's voice cut through his spiraling thoughts. "Ethan, we need to move. Greg won't stay away for long." He turned to face her, conflict etched across his features. "Why should I trust you? How do I know you're not working with him?" Caroline's eyes flashed with hurt and determination. "Because I'm done running. I'm done letting Greg control my life, our lives." She glanced towards the hallway where Lily slept, blissfully unaware of the chaos surrounding them. Ethan's gaze followed hers, and he felt a flicker of resolve ignite within him. "All right, what's the plan?" A ghost of a smile crossed Caroline's face. "We use your tech against them." For the next hour, they worked feverishly, transforming Ethan's mansion into a high-tech fortress. Security cameras were reprogrammed, motion sensors recalibrated. Ethan's fingers flew across keyboards, lines of code streaming across multiple screens. "There," he said, hitting the final key with a flourish. "The entire house is now one giant trap." Caroline peered over his shoulder, her brow furrowed. "Will it be enough?" Before Ethan could respond, an alarm blared through the house. On the security feed, they watched as Greg and two other men forced their way through the front gate. "Showtime," Ethan muttered, his heart racing. They split up, Caroline heading to secure Lily, while Ethan made his way to the foyer. He arrived just as the front door burst open, Greg's imposing figure silhouetted in the doorway. "Welcome back," Ethan said, his voice steady despite the fear coursing through him. I believe you forgot something during your last visit." Greg's laugh was cold and mirthless. "Oh, I didn't forget anything. In fact, I'm here to collect." He stepped forward, and Ethan tensed, ready to trigger the first of their traps. But before he could, a familiar voice rang out. "I'm afraid I can't let you do that, sir." Charles emerged from the shadows, a gun trained on Greg. Ethan's mind reeled. The butler's betrayal, his confession earlier. Had it all been an act? Greg's eyes narrowed. "You're making a mistake, old man. You have no idea who you're dealing with." Charles's grip on the gun never wavered. "On the contrary, I know exactly who you are, Mr. Harris, and I know what you're after." In that moment, everything clicked into place for Ethan. "The data," he breathed. "You were protecting it all along." Charles nodded, a hint of his usual prim demeanor returning. "I've worked for the Reynolds family for 3 generations, sir. Do you really think I'd betray that trust so easily?" Greg snarled, lunging towards Charles. The butler fired, the shot going wide as Greg tackled him. The gun skittered across the floor, coming to rest at Ethan's feet. Time seemed to slow as Ethan bent to pick up the weapon. He'd never held a gun before, its weight foreign and terrifying in his hand. Greg and Charles grappled on the floor, each fighting for dominance. "Ethan." Caroline's voice rang out from the top of the stairs. "The silent alarm's been triggered. Police are on their way." Greg's head snapped up at the sound of her voice, his eyes wild with rage. "You." He shoved Charles aside, charging towards the stairs. Ethan's mind raced. The traps, he needed to activate the traps. But as his finger hovered over the trigger on his phone, he hesitated. What if Lily got caught in the crossfire? In that moment of indecision, Greg reached the bottom of the stairs. Caroline stood her ground, fierce determination etched across her face. "You're not touching her," she growled. "Not ever again." Greg's laugh was ugly, filled with malice. "And who's going to stop me? Your new rich boyfriend? Please." He took another step forward, and Ethan knew he had to act. He raised the gun, his hand shaking. "Stop right there, Greg." Greg turned, a smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. "You won't shoot me. You don't have it in you." He was right, Ethan realized. He couldn't pull the trigger, but he could do something else. In one fluid motion, Ethan dropped the gun and swiped his finger across his phone screen. Instantly, the house came alive. Steel shutters slammed down over windows and doors. Smoke filled the foyer, obscuring their vision. Greg roared in frustration, blindly swinging his fists. Ethan ducked and weaved, leading Greg deeper into the house. Each room they entered sprung new surprises: tripwires, sudden drops, blinding lights. Finally, they reached Ethan's lab. Greg, battered and disoriented, stumbled through the door. Ethan slammed his hand on a nearby panel, and a transparent barrier dropped from the ceiling, trapping Greg inside. "What is this?" Greg snarled, pounding against the barrier. Ethan allowed himself a small smile. "Just a little something I've been working on. Completely soundproof, airtight, and impenetrable." Realization dawned on Greg's face, quickly replaced by fury. He hurled himself against the barrier, but it didn't so much as shudder. The sound of sirens filled the air, growing louder by the second. Ethan sagged against the wall, exhaustion and relief washing over him in equal measure. Caroline appeared in the doorway, Lily clinging to her side. The little girl's eyes were wide as she took in the scene before her. "Is it over?" Lily's voice was small, but hopeful. Ethan nodded, a lump forming in his throat. "Yeah, kiddo, it's over." The next few hours passed in a blur of police statements and paramedic checks. Detective Sanchez arrived, her sharp eyes taking in every detail of the chaotic scene. "You've got quite a story to tell, Mr. Reynolds," she said, her tone a mix of exasperation and grudging respect. Ethan ran a hand through his disheveled hair. "Believe me, Detective, I'm still trying to process it myself." As the police led Greg away in handcuffs, Ethan felt a tugging on his sleeve. He looked down to see Lily, her face streaked with tears, but her eyes shining with something that looked suspiciously like hope. Does this mean we can stay? The question hung in the air, laden with possibility. Ethan glanced at Caroline, seeing his own uncertainty mirrored in her eyes. He knelt down, bringing himself to Lily's level. "I think," he said slowly, "we've all found our place." The smile that broke across Lily's face was like the sun emerging from behind storm clouds. She threw her arms around Ethan's neck, and he found himself hugging her back, a warmth spreading through his chest that he hadn't felt in years. Caroline approached, her hand coming to rest on Lily's shoulder. "Are you sure about this, Ethan? Our lives, they're complicated, messy." Ethan stood, keeping one arm around Lily. He reached out with his free hand, taking Caroline's in his own. "I'm sure that I don't want to go back to the way things were before. The emptiness, the isolation. I'd rather have messy and complicated than that." As the first rays of dawn broke over the horizon, casting a golden glow over the battered mansion, Ethan felt a sense of peace settle over him. The road ahead would be challenging, filled with legal battles and emotional hurdles. But for the first time in longer than he could remember, he felt truly alive. Charles approached, looking worse for wear, but with a glimmer of his old self returning. "Shall I prepare breakfast, sir? I believe we could all use a good meal after the night we've had." Ethan laughed, the sound surprising even himself. "That sounds perfect, Charles. And maybe after, we can talk about redecorating. I think it's time for a change around here." As they made their way to the kitchen, Ethan marveled at the strange turns life could take. He had opened his door to strangers on a rainy night, never imagining how it would upend his entire world. But standing here now, with Caroline's hand in his and Lily chattering excitedly about pancakes, he knew he wouldn't have it any other way. The mansion, once a symbol of his isolation, now hummed with life and possibility. And as they gathered around the kitchen table, this unlikely family forged in chaos and adversity, Ethan realized that he had found something far more valuable than any technology or business success. He had found a home,